If you ask the average American anything about outsourcing, they would probably think about a virtual assistant in the Philippines or a developer in India. But what if I told you that African countries are the next big thing when it comes to outsourcing? Now, why does that matter? It matters for two reasons. If you are an entrepreneur or a business leader and you're looking for affordable, skilled, hardworking team members, you want to be hiring from the continent. It's a no-brainer. And number two, if you're that person, kind of like myself, who always feels a little bit behind the trend, maybe you didn't buy Bitcoin when you wish you would have, or you missed out on that stock that you definitely should have invested in, outsourcing in Africa is the next big thing. So get involved when it's still early on. Yes, it's been happening. It's all over the continent, but the average American and the average international business leader still doesn't see it yet, which is great for you because you can get ahead of the curve. In this short video, I'm going to share with you the 7 reasons why African countries are becoming the next powerhouse in outsourcing, and this will help you make more informed decisions for your next hire. So let's dive into it. Okay, reason number 1 is that traditional outsourcing countries are becoming saturated. And I'm talking about places like the Philippines or India. Recently, I had a conversation with an outsourcing company in the Philippines, and he wanted to white label our team members because he said it is a struggle to find good team members. Remember, countries like the Philippines are actually a small country. And so after decades and decades of outsourcing, this business owner was telling me that he's going more and more rural to find team members, but then they often lack either the education or the English needed to do a great job for their US clients. So all of this to say is that while outsourcing is happening in African countries, it's not at that point yet, which means it's still really easy to find great team members. Now, another important thing to know, especially if you're a small business owner, is that if you do hire from a traditional outsourcing destination, it's hard because there are already Fortune 500 companies there who have been building teams for decades. So if you're trying to hire from them, you're competing against Google, Microsoft, and these large companies that are probably offering so many perks, which isn't good for you as a small business owner to be competitive. So that is the advantage for you, is to go into an emerging outsourcing destination and you can easily find and hire great talent without as much competition. Number 2 is Africa's youth population. If you didn't know, Africa as a continent has the world's largest youth population. I think the current statistic is that 40% of the continent is age 15 or under, which is fantastic because if you look about hiring, you want to be hiring young people. They are naturally tech savvy, they have great education. I mean, in terms of, let's say, social media, who do you want to be running your TikTok? Obviously, you want someone young. And so when you're hiring from the continent, you are getting these young professionals who are eager to build a career, to work with you and do a great job. Number 3 is infrastructure. So way back in the day, these large companies would go into an emerging destination and they would spend a fortune building out a team that could then be their call center. But after the pandemic, COVID actually made remote work possible. Now, all of the tools you need are simply on your laptop. And thankfully, African countries have also been growing their infrastructure to take advantage of this. So it's easy for them to find good internet, good electricity, laptop, headset. All of that is pretty common, especially because you're hiring someone who is probably in the capital city where this is all much more prevalent. Now, this doesn't mean that it's not an issue. With our team members, we always have to make sure that their Wi-Fi speed is up to the speed it needs to be. We do all of these things to check on the back end. But in general, African countries' infrastructure is getting pretty good. In fact, some places like Madagascar actually have some of the world's fastest internet. And I'm talking about faster than the UK, faster than the US, which doesn't surprise me because I'm based here in Pittsburgh and I swear half the time my internet is the one that is causing problems, not my team members who are based in Ethiopia and other parts of the continent. So all you have to know is that the infrastructure, especially in the capital cities, is pretty good and definitely good enough to work remotely for you. Number 4 is the cost of living. So when it comes to outsourcing, one of the perks is that it's usually a more affordable rate. And why is it more affordable? It's because their cost of living is lower, which means you pay less, but it's still a competitive wage there. Now, I spent 8 years living in Ethiopia, and I always say that when I came back to the US and moved to Pittsburgh, our costs was 10, if not 20 times higher, which means we had to make 10, 20 times more to still have the same standard of living that we had in Ethiopia. So the benefits of outsourcing is that most African countries still have an affordable cost of living. Now, some places like South Africa or certain West African countries have a high cost of living, which means it's almost hard to outsource there. But for the majority of African countries, especially East Africa, where we do a lot of our hiring, you can pay a really affordable rate and get some awesome talent who is excited, who would actually have a significant pay raise working for you. Number 5 is education. So you have to keep in mind that for decades and decades, African governments, as well as large aid organizations like USAID or GIZ, have been investing in the education of Africa's youth. And what that means is now there's a huge plethora of African professionals who have had great education and who have experience and the knowledge and information they need to do a great job. Now, recently, I interviewed our Cradle intern, who also, in full transparency, is my niece. Her name's Ruthie. She's on the YouTube channel. And if you want to hear what a college student sounds like or what they're learning, check out that video. But what you have to know in general is that education on the continent is really, really good. And this also includes English. So English is one of the national languages in most African countries, and a lot of the African youth are learning it in school. So if you take Ethiopia, for example, they start learning English in kindergarten, 1 class a day, until high school. And then high school and college is 100% in English, except for 1 class a day, which is in Amharic, which is one of their national languages. So what you have to know is that the education is good, and that includes English. And then, of course, out of that is also accents. And if you've ever heard one of our audio samples or have hired one of our team members, you're going to know that the accent is super good. There are certain countries that have different types of accents, but it's definitely like if you were to say on a scale of 1 to 10, what accent do you want? If you want a 9 out of 10, super possible, again, to find tons and tons of African professionals who will easily be able to communicate with your team and with your customers. Now, number 6 goes back to the African youth population, and this time we're more focused on jobs. So the African continent needs a lot of jobs because there's all these youth entering the labor market. In fact, some statistics say that they need 18 million jobs every year created until 2035 just to keep up with the demand of all of these youth entering the workforce. Now, unfortunately, at this time, most African countries do not have the capacity to create that many jobs in the local economy only, which is why so many African governments are hopping on this bandwagon and trying to get outsourcing bigger in their country because there is such a huge demand to get jobs for their youth. So for you as a business leader, being able to hire from a place where there are so many young people who want jobs, who are looking for jobs, is a plus. I remember when I came back to the US just 2 years ago, and on every single store was a sign that said, "We're hiring." And you would see companies competing for $1 more or 50 cents more per hour because they were having a hard time attracting people who could fill those positions. And it was so weird for me because I had just moved from Ethiopia, where it was the opposite problem. There were so many young people who wanted to work, but not enough jobs. So that is one of the biggest, I would say, social impacts, as well as one of the biggest business advantages is hiring from a place where there's so many people who want to work. Number 7 is time zone. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is probably the most frequently asked question I get is on time zone. You have to know a few things. First, if time zone really mattered, a place like Philippines would never have taken off because 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. EST is practically 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. their time. So completely opposite shifts. So if time zone was actually a factor, Philippines never would have taken off. But number 2, when I see people blindly choosing Latin America for outsourcing because of the time zone, it doesn't make sense to me because you have to look at all of these other factors that make a destination attractive for outsourcing. Now, if you do want to know the time zone difference, it really depends what part of the continent you're talking about. Because remember, Africa is a big continent with lots of different different time zones in it. However, in a place, let's say like Ethiopia, where we do most of our hiring from, depending on the time change in the US, most of our team members log in around 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. and they clock out at midnight or 1 a.m. their time. So it's almost like a second shift. And most of our team members actually like this because they're going to grad school during the day, or their mom, they get to stay at home with their kids during the day, but it's not a big ask, especially when you're 25. Think to when you were 25, did you mind staying up to midnight? No, it's not that late. Our team members always say, like, at least we get paid for staying up late now, you know? So it's not a big difference. And also you have to remember that if someone is applying to work for a US job, they know the US hours, but they want to work there. For our team members, when they apply, if they don't want a US hour, we just put them with one of our European clients. But if time zone is one of the biggest things you're worried about, I would say stop worrying because the time zone is not that big of a deal. And everybody who is applying to work for a US company knows the time zone and chose it for a reason. So those are the 7 reasons why African countries really are becoming the next outsourcing destinations in the world. And as someone who has traveled the continent and lived there for almost a decade combined, I can tell you that it is taking off so fast. Now, while there are some companies who are already outsourcing there, it's still not big enough. And that's part of our mission at Cradle, is to spread the word that you can and should be hiring from the continent. It's a great social impact and it's also a great business ROI. Now, tell me in the comments below what questions you have about hiring from the African continent.